Welcome back to the Riichi Mahjong guide. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to handle certain tiles in your hand. The first set of tiles we're going to be discussing are honor tiles. So if at the beginning of the game, you had one of each honor tile in your hand, and you decided for whatever reason not to go for Kokushimuso or anything like that, which honor tile would you discard first? It depends on a lot of factors, right? So although the dragon tiles are pretty much equal in their value, except for the Hatsu being the only one that's a part of Ryuiso, they're pretty much the same. And Ryuiso is rare enough that you don't really have to consider that possibility. However, the wind tiles aren't all equal. Their value changes based on the player's seeding and based on whether it's east or south round. So there are a few things to consider when you decide which honor tiles to discard and in what order. Of course, if you're just trying to pair up some Yakuhai to try and win a game quickly, then you would just toss out the winds that are not your Yakuhai. So for instance, if you are south and it is the east round, you would just toss out the west and the north first because they have no value in your hand. And one other thing you should consider is, what if someone calls on the tile that you discard? For the Hakuhatsu and Chun, you can't really tell who has them, but for the wind tiles, you can kind of guess at who might call on them based on which ones are Yakuhai for each player. So for instance, in the east round, the east is a Yakuhai for every player, so that doesn't really narrow it down that much. But for the player who is east, it counts as double. So if they have a pair, they would be very likely to call on it. So one thing you would consider is tossing out the wind tile of the person to your right earlier and tossing out the wind tile of the person to your left later, because you would rather have the person to your left call pwn on your discarded wind tile, because that would give you an extra turn and skip the other two players' turns, and waiting before discarding their wind tile gives them more of a chance to pair it up in their hand if that's what they're trying to do. It's a small thing, but it is something to consider. And if you're trying to play more defensively, you would probably want to hold on to some honor tiles as safe tiles later in the game. We're going to get more into defense in another video, but honor tiles are generally safer than number tiles because they're harder to use. Of course, if you toss out an honor tile that's Yakuhai for the person waiting on it, you just increase the value of their hand. But in general, it's much more difficult to wait on an honor tile than it is on number tiles. In general though, the thing that I like to do is hold on to my own wind tile, especially if it's not the round wind, because that tile would not be Yakuhai for anyone else if it's not the round wind, and therefore be relatively safe, even if there are none on the field later in the game. And even if someone's waiting on it, the value of their hand probably won't be that much because it doesn't add any Yaku to their hand. So those are just a few things to consider regarding honor tiles and the order in which you discard them. The next thing we're going to talk about are Dora tiles. So regardless of whether you're using red Dora or not, there are various schools of thought when it comes to how to handle Dora tiles. One of them is just don't discard Dora tiles ever at all. Try to work them in your hand in some way, because just by having one Dora in your hand, you're essentially doubling the value of your hand because it's worth one Han. Another way that people might deal with them is to hold them for as long as possible and then only discard a Dora if it gets them to Tenpai. That's probably a little bit more reasonable than just don't discard them ever. Another thing would be, if you don't see a way to use Dora in your hand, you could discard it when it's safe. For instance, immediately after someone else discards a Dora, you can just follow them and discard that same tile, and then it would be much safer than just throwing it out randomly because of the temporary Furiten rule. When it comes to numbered Dora tiles, what I see pros do is that they just hold onto tiles that could be used with the Dora, even if it's inefficient. So for instance, if the Dora is the 3-so, they might hold on to a penchant of the 1 and 2-so much longer than they normally would, just because on the off chance they draw the Dora, they can make use of it in their hand. And that's not a bad idea either, to hold tiles around the Dora just in case you draw it. And that's always something to keep in mind when developing your hand. If you get to a point where you have to break up certain weight patterns in your hand and you're deciding between which ones are more important. You might end up holding on to a worse weight pattern like a kenchan as opposed to a kanchan because it has the possibility of using Dora. Especially if red Dora are included, it's common to see people hold on to tiles around the 5s just in case they happen to draw that one red 5 in that suit. So if you have a double kanchan like this and you have to break up one side of it, as opposed to trying to get a suji trap by tossing out the 4-pin, you would generally toss out the 8-pin just in case you draw that red 5-pin. But what if the Dora just happens to be an honor tile? You can't really hold anything around it because it can only be used with other copies of itself. Honor tile Dora are a little bit more tricky to deal with. I've still seen players hold on to the Dora no matter what and never discard it just because if they can even pair it up and use it as their pair, that's still another 2 Han they added to their hand. And I've seen people wait on a honor tile Dora Tanki with no other Yaku just because it's the Dora. But of course, it's more reasonable to try and discard an honor tile Dora when it's safe, such as after someone else does it, or if it's to get you into Tenpai, just like with other Dora. So they are a little bit more tricky to handle, but it's harder for other players to use them in their hands. It's not really as dangerous tossing out the Dora if it's an honor tile when compared to if it's a number tile. But if the Dora also happens to be Yakuhai and someone calls Pwn on it, you just gave them a 4-Han hand guaranteed. So you just have to be wary of that. If you're not careful and discard it recklessly or hold on to it for too long, that single Dora of a Yakuhai could end up strangling your hand until the end, forcing you to wait on it. So you just have to use your best judgment with regards to that. So in this video, we discussed different ways to handle honor tiles and Dora tiles. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and thank you for watching.